Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 12th of March 2024. Fourth time lucky at starting this video. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the video at the moment. Pause the video. Right, let's go straight to the map to actually look at the northern border before we look in more detail at everything else that is going on. I did a breaking news update about the attacks that the pro-Ukrainian Russian units are doing across the border into Kursk, just in this area there, and in the Belgorod region, just north of Kharkiv, the city, and the oblast here, and here, I believe. So a number of incursions there. One particular place is this little town called Tetkino, that the claim is the Russians have run away from there. The troops have run away from protecting that, and the Ukrainians, or the pro-Ukrainian Russians, now control that that whole area. I think this is probably I don't know, be quite charitable to say they control it. I think the sorts of numbers going across the border and the amount of equipment they're going to be using, it's going to be a raid rather than any kind of proper maneuver. And I think they probably have lost some equipment in so doing now. Lots of threads online talking about the different activities that are taking place, the different units, these three units including, or the three units that are the new Siberian Battalion or Legion, the Freedom of Russia Legion, and the Russian Volunteer Corps. There appears to have been maybe a cyber attack going on at the same time, as well as drones attacking Belgorod and possibly other places, artillery working, exchanging across the border, and etc, etc. Just in the Kharkiv region, you can see here that there's an attack towards Grivoron, attack towards Shebekino. These are important because they are places that have been attacked before by these same people, but then also towards Kazinka here supposedly as well. So that's possibly a new axis of attack. But going back to Tetkino, the place in Kursk here, yeah, that is possibly a little bit more, well, not more serious. They appear to have done a little bit more in terms of, you know, blowing up the. We have seen that a piece of Russian equipment that's been blown up there, and we have seen Russian troops running away from positions there. So possibly some success, but as mentioned, you know, there's an awful lot of stuff to look at here. As mentioned, there's lots of footage coming out. Tank of the Russian Volunteer Corps firing towards Russian positions. So there is tank activity going on. Siberian Battalion have released footage from a border crossing point with Russia. Quote, under the onslaught of the Siberian Battalion fighters, Putin's military abandoned the checkpoints on their territory and fled their duty station. And there's some burning equipment. And then more footage released by the Freedom of Russia Legion. A fragment of a morning battle defeat of a company stronghold on the enemy during an approach to Tetkino. And that's a place I was just mentioning. And then on the other hand, the Russians have hit back with releasing a bit of footage themselves. So this is Russian state agency RIA publishes footage of the Nekotivka checkpoint. And we'll see where that is on the border in a Belgorod region, which shows a tank immobilized with damaged tracks, likely the Russian insurgent group. So just there you can see a tank with a track that's certainly come off right across there. There is a claim that it went over a mine, but it is in the middle of a road, so I'd find it quite odd if there was a mine right there. But you never know, it could have been placed there in advance of that. So that has happened. Then Russian sources have published more abandoned equipment by Russian insurgent forces in the Belgorod-Kursk regions. At least several armoured carriers were abandoned, assuming they are indeed left in that area. Just can't really comment any more than that is a picture of three vehicles. You know, whether they're abandoned or not, don't know that you can tell. That, whatever that is looking in a slightly worse state, but really can't confirm any of that. But it wouldn't surprise me if the Russians hit back hard. I mean, this is within Russia, and you'd imagine this is they've got to be controlling the PR that's going on here. So it'd be interesting to see where the Nekotivka border checkpoint is. After looking across the border for many minutes and finding about 37 places that have the same names as other places in Ukraine, it's my favourite pastime, that one, I did a search for it, and it's just north of Kharkiv. So that's one of the three places that, well, it's not one of the three places they're attacking, supposedly at Griveron, at Shebekino, and over here towards Kazinka. But actually, this is between the Shebekino incursion and the Griveron, if they are indeed the places where they're attacking. So yeah, right on this border town, a checkpoint there. That is a footage that apparently indicates the destroyed tank, Ukrainian tank. But yeah, be interested to see what develops there over the course of the next few days, whether these pro-Ukrainian units are going to bother keeping the pressure up and keeping on doing that. As I say, I think this can only really be a raid rather than anything more substantial than that. But interesting that they're using tanks. And it shows you also that they are working in unison with the armed forces of Ukraine more formally. Right, coming on down to the front line proper, we have from Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna, no changes at all, which I think is incredibly significant. The Institute for the Study of War says that geolocated footage published on March 10th indicates that Russian forces advanced east of Terny, and we did report that yesterday in this area. So this is Kreminna over to the east, and then Terny here. So east of Terny was exactly where Syriac maps had their own claimed increase of Russian control. The Russian Mill blogger claimed that recent footage of Ukrainian forces attempted attacks in the Terny direction, so Ukrainian forces attacking, confirms that Ukrainian forces controlled Terny and refutes claims that Russian forces entered the settlement. So there have been some Russian sources claiming that the Russians have entered into Terny. The Mill blogger claimed that Russian forces may launch a simultaneous attack on Terny and Yampolivka at an unspecified point in the future to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead on the right bank of the Zherebets River, and that the Ukrainian forces have held since autumn 2022. Well, yep, that may well happen. They are keen to take this and this area and move up to the Zherebets River, which is an area that goes, the Zherebets comes down here. And so realistically, this whole area is what the Russians would like to get back, and it gives them a natural barrier to then decide what to do next. Ideally, really, they want to take the whole of the land up to the Oskil River, but I think that's entirely unrealistic. Far more realistic to take a smaller area. And of course, bite and hold. They take off small chunks and then hold it. Here we have that geolocated footage. This is a friendly BMP crew, men with strong layers. The translation is a bit funny here. And not every car will take a direct hit, especially at the time of greatest use of anti-aircraft fire. You immediately become the number one target. However, believe me, when 30mm cannon is working at you, the desire to go forward decreases many times over. So there's some activity there. This has been translated into a Ukrainian BMP-2 IFV attacks Russian-controlled territory while under enemy fire, work of the Ukrainian 92nd Brigade. And that is taking place here. And yeah, sounds pretty brave of the Ukrainian IFV crew to be doing that. And that is indeed around where Syriac Map showed some increases. And indeed, Andrew Perpetua had some increases there too. Just slightly different interpretation of the mapping there. So that's Ukrainians attacking Russian positions in this place. So that's to assume that the Russians are dug in there in order for the Ukrainians to attack them in that position. Right, okay, so moving on. We're going to come next to past the Seversk front line, where it's not a lot happening, which is good because that was looking a bit hairy in the Berestova area for some time. And we're going to come to just north of Ivanivska. No changes to Ivanivska again. We'll talk about that in a little while. We come to Bodanivka just north of there. And indeed, some gains for the Ukrainians here. Deep State Map has a little bit of, a tree line there, and Andrew Perpetua likewise. Actually, we go to the ISW first. They say that geolocated footage published on March 6th, so that's some time ago, March 6th, 6 days, shows that Ukrainian forces advance in a field north of Bodanivka, though Ukrainian forces did not likely recently advance. So this is a confirmation that the Ukrainians have advanced there. Let's find that geolocation. So Ukrainian Signum and Brandenburg 800th Unit of the 93rd Brigade capture Russian position northwest of Bonanivka, and here is the geolocation. And so this sometimes happens, of course. You find out evidence of one side or the other having control over a certain tree line or a particular landmark, and it might not be recent. It might have happened 4 months ago or 2 months ago or 3 days ago, but you adjust your maps accordingly, it might not mean that it happened in the last 24 hours. So in this case, the Ukrainians actually have more land to the north of Bodanivka, and then you could question, what the lines really are in Bodanivka as well. But that's good news for the Ukrainians because it helps them with the buffer between Chaziv Yar and the Russian forces. They're struggling more in Ivaniska, but it's interesting what they say in the ISW about Ivaniska. Ukrainian company commander operating Bakhmut direction has stated that Russian forces captured positions on the outskirts of Ivaniska in early March. So we're now at 12th of March, and have not advanced further since then. So there is at least a Ukrainian source to say that actually they aren't that much further on than the outskirts here, but all the mappers here seem to indicate that the Russians have really the majority of Ivaniska under their control. So, take your pick as to who you want to believe, I guess. As I've said many times before, I think that the stabilisation on the front in many places, including Ivanivska to some degree, but also the lack of movement of the Russians by the Russians in other places like Klishivka, Kodimivka, Ozarinivka, Andriivka means that I don't think the Russians have a huge depth in the attacks they have. They are trying in certain areas particularly, and that is, yes, to some degree to the west of Avdiivka, but really I think it's concentrating more on Krasnohorivka, Mariinka, and Pobieda area and Novomykhailivka. But we'll come to that in a second. For the time being, let's have a look at what's going on just to the west of Avdiivka. Now, claims that Berdichi here, the Ukrainians have been pushed back a little bit by the Russians. That's Syriac Maps making that claim. I don't know that we have too much. We don't have any other tweets or anything to clarify that, unless it's one from yesterday. But nonetheless, I think that the Ukrainians have done a really good job to at least somewhat stabilize this area. I think there's heavy fighting in Orlivka, Berdichi, and Tonienka areas, of course, but it's not the advances that we saw the Russians take, as they were sweeping through Avdiivka, ending up with the town or the city falling quite quickly. Once it started going, then it was a pretty quick collapse. But actually, since they've got past Lastochkerna and to these other villages, it has been far more grinding for the Russians, and that coincides with the Ukrainians having reinforcements and artillery ammunition. I think it's just so frustrating because when the Ukrainians are given artillery ammunition, when they have it, they use it so effectively and they can defend their lands really well. It's just so frustrating that their fates lie in the hands of others, and sometimes those others aren't so forthwith in delivering things like ammunition when they need it most. So Pervomaisky here, the Russians making some further gains. I talked about this yesterday about how they're coming along past the top of this lake here and coming down the side of it between the two water features, and that could indeed operationally encircle this area, and you might see the Ukrainians pull quite quickly out of there if this continues, because that's looking a bit hairy. Pervomaisky is basically just ruins these days. The Syriac Maps here making claims that the Russian army took control over the forest belts of the settlement of Novelska. So I think that's fairly significant. We'll come to that in a second. In addition, Russian troops took control over more territory in the axis north of Pervomaisky. In terms of Avdiivka. Let's just look into what the ISW says. So positional fighting continued west of Avdiivka on March the 11th, but there were no confirmed changes to the front line. Remember, Surat Maps had a little bit in Badichi for the Russians. A Russian mill blogger claimed that on March the 10th that Russian forces advanced 280 meters along Mir Street in Olivka, which is consistent with recent confirmed Russian advances in the settlement. Another Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are catching most of Pervomaisky, but ISW has not observed visual confirmation of this claim, and that's indeed what we're talking about here with regard to what Surat Maps has just pointed out. Positional fighting, a mill blogger claimed on March the 10th that the pace of Russian assaults in the Avdiivka direction has slowed. It slowed between March the 3rd and 10th, but that Russian forces continue offensive operations west of Avdiivka in the Berdichi-Olivka at Tonyenka line, despite Ukrainian counterattacks. Positional fighting continued northwest of Avdiivka, near Novobakhmutivka and Berdichi, west of Bakhmut, near Olivka and Tonyenki. I think that means west of Avdiivka, and southwest of Avdiivka near Nevelsky and Pervomaisky. So, yeah, slightly worrying here that this very important, really, small agricultural settlement is under increasing pressure from the east, with the Ukrainians, according to Surat Maps and Deep State Maps, being pushed back a little bit out of these fields, and Russia taking control. Then when we come to the next section, a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces fighting on the Berdichi-Olivka-Tonyenka line west of Avdiivka are degraded and struggling to make significant advances. This is basically what I read out to you yesterday, I think it was yesterday, from one of the personnel, one of the members of one of the units attacking, or in the, I'll show you on the map, in this area up here, where he was talking about a lack of communication between the groups, about how they're all just sitting in basements, not really doing anything, just filling up basements. They send them in to fill up basements, and then they can say, yep, our troops are attacking, but not an awful lot of efficient military work going on. So this is sort of summarizing what was said. The mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are focusing on the Olivka-Tonyenka area and are making steady tactical advances, but that Russian forces overall are struggling. The mill blogger claimed that Russian forces here are struggling due to degraded staff work, poor training of command staff, poor organization, and lack of coordination and communication, particularly between different units. The mill blogger claimed that different Russian units entrenched in basements close to each other, and they do not communicate with each other and struggle with surveillance of the areas. The mill blogger advised that Russian forces should not get bogged down on the Berdichi-Olivka-Tonyenka line, but should focus on the Berdichi area instead of the entire Olivka-Tonyenka line as they are now. Okay, so that's again just saying that things are operationally, from tactics, operations, strategies point of view, but like operationally, then operating in this area, that the Russians are really struggling to perform cohesive actions, and they are taking ground. But I think it's probably just a case of overloading the Ukrainians and having a greater mass, and that having the effect of taking more land. Now, interestingly, around Krasnohorivka, Surat Maps dialing things back there. Yesterday we saw some gains for the Ukrainians south of there, as according to the other two mappers. Surat Maps is pulling them out of the southern reaches of Krasnohorivka. Again, this is very likely just some overzealous mapping in the first place, that they could well have been fighting in those streets, but maybe pushed back. And rather than saying, right, it's a grey zone, they're fighting at the moment, let's have a look and see how it is in a day's time or 2 days' time. It's like, right, they're fighting the grey zone, therefore it's not the grey zone because Russians are there. Yeah, but maybe Ukrainians are there too. Yeah, but Russians are there, therefore the Russians control it. And as I have to say this every day, I have 50% newbies every day. But yet, that's the nature of the way that he does his mapping, and that explains to some degree why there are such significant mapping differences between these mappers. If we go to other sources, here we have in the Mariinka area. I'm going to have to refresh my map. It doesn't like going on to Telegram very much. So this Telegram source says active hostilities in the area of Mariinka, attacked by the Russian armed forces north of Herivka with 2 armoured vehicles, shelling of the assault group by the armed forces of Ukraine. So in other words, here is an example of Russians attacking. Now again, the ISW will use this as kind of geolocation. And indeed, it is one of their geolocated claims. Geolocated footage published on March 11th shows that Russian forces recently advanced north of Herivka, Pobieda and Novomykhailivka. And the geolocations it gives, this is one of them. Now, I would argue that this is an attack, and it wouldn't suggest that they control that area. So the claim from the actual source that you used here, and I know this is exactly what I say pretty much every day, active hostilities, the Russian armed forces attacked with 2 armored vehicles and they are shelled there, and quite possibly destroyed there, not 100% sure. But I don't think that warrants the claim or the belief that they have indeed control of that area. Right, I've closed that Telegram link down and didn't like it at all. Right, that is to say that the Russians have attacked around here doesn't necessarily mean they control all that ground, and therefore the difference between the mappers, quite possibly. And then as we come further to the south, again, a very similar scenario where there is some example of some Russian vehicles being destroyed. My annoyance at the doorbell going has been somewhat overcome by my joy at receiving some stash. So this is a light hoodie that I've just got. ATP Geopolitics. Whoop whoop. Anyway, that's enough of that rubbish. So let's look at the Novomykhailivka claims here. So a new pile of BMPs north of Novomykhailivka. And that's the geolocation, and there's sort of video footage of that, scattered enemy vehicles after a failed armoured assault on Novomykhailivka. Let's put that in and see where that is. And here we go. Yes, so that was yesterday. There were some gains, as according to Surrey Maps, just there. And I was saying that's a bit of a worry because that's a heavily fortified area. So definitely the Russians are there, as in they are driving around there, but they're also getting completely blown up there. So again, just the same thing. Surrey Maps mapping that as control of Russian control, and the other mappers going, well, they're driving there and getting blown up, so they don't really control it. But just to go north a little bit, just north of Pobieda, a little bit of a worry there. That allows them to get further purchase into Herivka, possibly, in being able to attack it from the south if they get moved further on. I don't know how well. I presume all of these are pretty well fortified, but I don't know exactly. I'm kind of guessing there. But certainly further down north of Novomykhailivka, this was well fortified Ukrainian territory, and looks like the Russians are making those gains, but this is very much grey zone, very much a lot of equipment being destroyed there. Small Russian gains, as according to Surrey Maps, just north of Novomykhailivka, but again, it could just be an attack. Don't know how sustained that control is there. Right, then just make sure that there's nothing in the ISW. It needs to be additional geolocated footage on March 10th shows that Russian forces marginally advanced southeast of Shevchenko, which was marked the other day by one of the mappers, and a Russian mail blogger claimed on March 11th that Russian forces advanced in the area. So that is just here, and this is what was added to the mapping by Surrey Maps yesterday, that area there. And if we go to the Telegram here, 6 units of enemy armoured vehicles were destroyed by paratroopers of the 46th Separate Airmobile Brigade in the Donetsk direction. Another attempt by the occupiers to storm the defenders' positions ended in complete fiasco. Equipment minus personnel minus. Equipment minus personnel minus. So I think that's a Shevchenko one, but I was struggling to find some of these, looking at the footnotes to the ISW, trying to struggle to find all of them there. So that could be referring to that one or another one. I mean, they have just lost a lot of equipment, the Russians, all down this front. Or, around Volodar recently, they've lost quite a bit, and they are making gains. But as is always a question, is it worth their while? Is that a fair swap? small amounts of territory for just tremendous numbers of vehicles and personnel. Right, and then we come down to Robotina here, where Suriyat Mats has some further gains, and this is what I showed you yesterday on a map, but JR hadn't done the update then, and thanks so much to JR who's done it today. So I showed you the tweet from Suriyat Maps, but not the change to the map. But here it is. Not sure that that's definitely happened, though. There are no other mappers agreeing with that. Ukrainians definitely did have control of these trenches there up until very recently, as according to Andrew Perpetua's analysis and his team. So, yeah, not 100% sure what's taking place in that area. Geolocated footage published on the 7th to the 10th shows that Russian forces advanced southeast of Chervony and southwest of Velika Novosilka. Okay, that's just to come back from here, and actually that was shown on the mapping yesterday, just around Chervony, which is there, and that's why there's a difference between Suriyat Maps and Andrew Perpetua's mapping there. I don't know if this one. So highly interesting. New Russian axis near Chervony, Zaporizhia, possibly the 114th MR Regiment. Russia lost 3 BTRs and the famous UAZ 469 sending infantry into orbit. Geolocations below. And so you can see all of that destruction taking place. But yet again, the question is, just because they are attacking in that area, does it actually mean that they control that area? And so we get back to just the same old point as I keep making over and over with regard to what how Suriyat Maps does their mapping. So just to give you a bit of geolocation there, here is at least one of those vehicles, a BTR, destroyed, actually slightly off the mapping. Let's see another one here, see where that ends up, and see if we have anything particularly different. Yeah, pretty similar actually attack vector there, but actually not inside. Expecting it to be inside that area that they mapped yesterday. Alas, not to be. Anyway, activity around there that's slightly different place than we've seen previous activity really for a long time. I mean, that's a new one really. And then as mentioned, Robotina, not sure how much is actually happening down there. The ISW claims that their positional engagements continue in that area. No confirmed changes to the frontline areas. Russian sources claim Russian forces captured several unspecified positions between Robotina and Verbove, although ISW has not confirmed that. So that's on the other side. So you've got Verbove over here and Robotina over here. So some positions around here, but not to the west of Robotina. So no confirmation of that claim at all. And then I thought it's quite interesting in the ISW what they say about Krinky, which is kind of where I was expecting Krinky to go, but the Ukrainians just oddly made some gains there recently. But now says Ukrainian forces maintained limited positions on the left bank of the Dnipro, and positional engagements continued on the left bank, particularly near Krinky, Kherson Oblast Occupation Administration head. So that is a Russian. So Vladimir Saldo is a Russian guy, claimed only scattered groups of Ukrainian servicemen remain in Krinky. Now, even though that's coming from a Russian, I wouldn't necessarily doubt that. I mean, with only 1 brigade out of 4 remaining there, as far as I understand it still, I don't know how long the Ukrainians are going to choose to keep hold of that, although there were talks about them considering expanding that bridgehead. But in order to do that, you would need considerable forces and quite a bit of equipment. So I don't know how doable that really is. And still, I mean, let's talk about making bids on Crimea, and all of this is shaping operations taking place in these strikes on Crimea, etc. I think you possibly could. Like I've said before, my entire approach to the Ukrainian war, the defense of Crimea at the moment, would be a kind of active defense where that active defense entails getting hold of an absolute bucket load of missiles and drones and just flinging them at the Russians every single night as much as possible, hammering the crap out of logistics, the oil depots, the air defense systems, the boats, using naval drones, just hammering away at everything in ways that does not attrit the one problem that everyone accepts that Ukraine has outside of ammunition and not being given the stuff that they were expecting. But let's assume that they're going to get that. But the real big challenge for Ukraine is boots on the ground. So how can you attrit the Russian forces without attriting your own forces? By using missiles, drones, rockets, artillery, all different types of drones. And that's what Ukraine should be worrying about. I would spend 9 months just hammering the Russians until they just go, oh, God, we can't do this anymore. Yeah, that's how I would do that. I know it's quite simplistic, but realistically, all it takes is just things. Not boots on the ground, just things, just us getting them, or them building missiles and drones and rockets and precision guided munitions. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all your support. I'm going to hopefully do a live tonight to help push this new fundraising initiative with Greg Terry, Prof. Gerdes as well, getting together to fundraise. For a new thing that we're doing. If you've seen Greg's live stream last night, you'll know all about it. But yeah, drop into that one. We'll have a chat about how things are going on the front line, what his experiences are, and then initiate that fundraising drive. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak soon.